wonderful person. Welcome to Adult Bedtime Stories, or welcome back, probably, because we are on, chapter 9, yep, of The Secret History of the World by Mark Booth. If you are not already, please hit the subscribe button, ring the notification bell, smash that thumbs up button, and comment something clever, or wait to comment your favorite part of the chapter. Let's get to it. Chapter 9. The Neolithic, Alexander the Great, Noah and the Myth of Atlantis, Tibet, Ramas, Conquest of India, the Yoga Sutras of Panda. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right. If you have just a passing acquaintance with the Myth of Atlantis, you may well have been left with the impression that there's only one source for this legend, Plato. Maybe that is why somebody commented that I'm illiterate, because I can't pronounce a lot of things. That's rude. I can take it. A little bit I can take. Not a lot. The Platonic account goes like this. Egyptian priests told Solon, a statesman and lawyer of the generation of Plato's great-grandfather, about a great island in the Atlantic that had been destroyed some 1,009 years earlier, so in about 9,600 BC. The civilization on this island had been founded by the god Poseidon, and people by the descendants of his coupling with a beautiful woman called Cleito. As we saw in Chapter 5, this intervention by a fish god is a coded account of evolution common to mythologies all around the world. As well as the main island, the Atlantean civilization also ruled over several lesser islands in the region. The largest island was dominated by a beautiful and fertile plain and a large hill. Here Cleito lived, and the people enjoyed food which grew abundantly on the island. 2 streams of water came up through the earth, one of hot water and one of cold. To keep Cleito for himself, Poseidon had a series of circular canals dug around the hill. In time, a sophisticated civilization grew up, taming wild animals, mining metals, and building temples, palaces, racecourses, gymnasiums, public baths, government buildings, harbors, and bridges. Many walls were coated with metals, with brass, tin, and a red metal unknown to us called orchkelum. The temples had roofs of ivory and pinnacles of silver and gold. The islands of Atlantis were ruled over by 10 kings, each with his own kingdom, the 9 others being subservient to the ruler of the largest island. The central temple, dedicated to Poseidon, had status of gold, including one of the gods standing in a chariot pulled by 6-winged horses and flanked by hundreds of nereids riding dolphins. Live bulls roamed freely around the forest of columns in this temple, and every 5 or 6 years the kings who ruled the islands were left alone in the temple to hunt these bulls without weapons. They would capture one, lead it up the great column of orchkelum, inscribed with laws of Atlantis, and there behead it. Life on the islands of Atlantis were generally idyllic. In fact, life was so good that eventually people could not bear it any longer, and began to become restless, dissecant, and corrupt, searching after novelty and power, so Zeus decided to punish them. The islands were flooded until only small islets remained, like a skeleton sticking out of the sea. Then finally a great earthquake engulfed all that was left in the course of one day and one night. Damn, Zeus. Could have been his good side, huh? Yes, it would make this account of the destruction of Atlantis unlikely to be true if Plato were the only classical writer on the subject. Aristotle said Plato alone made Atlantis rise out of the sea, and then he submerged it again, which he has been taken to mean that Plato simply made the whole thing up. However, a little research shows that this classical literature is packed with references to Atlantis, for example, in the works of Proclus, Diodorus, Pliny, Strabo, Plutarch, and Pausanias, and they include many elements which are not in Plato and seem to come from earlier sources, assuming that they haven't been made up too. Proclus says that 300 years after Solon, Crantor was shown by the priest of Sais columns covered with a history of Atlantis in hieroglyphic characters. A near contemporary of Plato's, now known as Pseudo-Aristotle, wrote about a similar island paradise in his book On Marvelous Things Heard. The Greek historian Marcellus, also a near contemporary of Plato's, is clearly relying on ancient sources when he writes that in the outer ocean, the Atlantic, there are 7 small islands and 3 larger ones, one of which was dedicated to Poseidon. This ties in with Plato's account in terms of the number of kingdoms. A Greek historian of the 4th century BC, Theopompus of Chios, retells a story told 200 years before Plato by Midas of Phrygia, that besides that well-known portions of that world, Europe, Asia, Libya, Africa, there's another which is unknown, of incredible immensity, where vast blooming meadows and pastures feed herds of various huge and mighty beasts, and where the men are twice the height and live to twice the age of men, where we have already mentioned this quotation. Enoch and the myths and legends of many cultures around the world recorded the prevalence of giants before the Great Flood. Then, of course, there is the Greek myth of the Great Flood. The story of the Decalon is much older than Plato. The story of Deocalon is much older than Plato, as in both Plato's account and the biblical one. There is an implication here that the Great Flood was intended to destroy the greater part of humankind, because the development of our race had gone wrong. Rudolf Steiner has pointed out that the stories of the demigods and heroes Cadmus, Theseus, Jason, all involve journeys eastward. We should read them, he says, as stories of migrations which took place as conditions on the Atlantean islands deteriorated and before the final catastrophe. When Plato writes about Poseidon, the first god, king of Atlantis, this should remind us again that Poseidon was the original half-fish form of Zeus. Jupiter, Poseidon was also god of the raging sea, god of subterranean volcanic depths, whose bull-bellowing roar signaled climatic catastrophe. Poseidon was at work at both the beginning and end of Atlantis history. Other ancient cultures cross-reference Plato's account. The Aztecs recorded that they came from Aztlan, the land in the middle of the water. Sometimes this land was called Aslan of the 7 Caves. It was depicted as a central large step pyramid surrounded by 6 smaller pyramids. According to traditions collected by the invading Spaniards, humanity had nearly been wiped out by a vast flood, and would have been but for a priest and his wife who constructed a boat made out of a hollow log, in which they also rescued seeds and animals. The complex and sophisticated astronomy of these American tribes has also won modern researcher to deduce that they dated this flood to about 11,600 BC. This might seem a long way from Plato's date of around 9,600 BC, but the crucial point here is that both dates agree in setting the flood at the end of the Ice Age. Modern geology tells us that, as the ice caps melted, a series of floods swept down from the north. We have already noted the suggestion that the islands of Atlantis suffered several catastrophic floods over a long period before the last island was finally completely submerged. Underwater, archaeologists are today discovering in many parts of the world the remains of civilizations which were covered by floods caused by the melting of ice at the end of the Ice Age. In April 2002, diverse stories told by local fishermen were used to help locate the lost city of the 7 Pagodas off the coast of Mahabalipuram in India. The temple-like structures that have been found are much grander and more complex than we would expect for the end of the Ice Age. The Neolithic or New Stone Age author and investigator Graham Hancock, who has done so much to question academic assumptions about ancient history, was quoted at the time as saying, "I have argued for many years that the world's flood myths deserve to be taken seriously, a view the most Western academics reject. But here in Mahabalipuram we have proved the myths right and the academics wrong. I myself have seen artifacts retrieved from the seabed off the American Atlantic coast, the so-called Scots stones, which I am persuaded it would be very difficult for technology to reproduce today, let alone 11,000 years ago when the area in question was covered by the sea. In design terms, the Scott stones show features which are remarkably similar to Egyptian artifacts. This is not my secret to reveal, but I hope that perhaps by the time this book is published, Aaron Duval, president of the Miami Museum Egyptological Society, may have chosen to show the world what he has. No detailed description of the events that put such artifacts under the sea has survived in the Greek myths that has come down to us, and the biblical accounts are characteristically brief, but these can be supplemented and illuminated by accounts from other cultures, particularly the Sumerian and other Near Eastern accounts. No scholars dispute that some of these accounts from older cultures provided source material for the biblical story. Elements familiar to us from the biblical accounts, such as the ark, the doves, and the olive branch, appeared in the earlier Sumerian account, where Noah is called Zaya Sudra. He appears too in the Mesopotamian account, where he is called Atrahasis, and in the Babylonian account, which names him Upnapishtim. This book is killing me. Weaving these different versions together creates an amplified version of the biblical story. Yeah, can we just call him Noah? Thank you. One day Noah was standing in a reed hut when he heard a voice coming through the wall that warned him of a rainstorm that would wipe out mankind. Tear down your reed hut and build a boat, he told. Noah and his family set about building a great vessel made out of reeds, finally daubing it with bitumen in order to make it watertight. Everything growing out of the ground, everything grazing on it, the birds of the sky, the cattle, and the wild animals roaming open country, he put in. Then for 6 days and nights the storm blew, and their boat was tossed about by the waves. And downpour of the storm and the flood overwhelmed the surface of the earth. On the 7th day, hearing the winds begin to fall, Noah opened a window, and light fell on his face. The world was silent because all humanity had been returned to clay. Damn! The catastrophic deluge that nearly destroyed humankind is remembered every year by both the living and the dead on the Day of the Dead or Halloween. I didn't know that. In England, as late as the 19th century, villagers would dress up as the dead, wear masks, and make a mummying sound with closed lips to imitate the sound made by the walking dead, hence the word mummers. So ancient zombies were called mummers. Cool. When Noah and his family disembarked, setting foot on dry land again, something rather odd happened, and Noah began to be a husbandman, and he planted a vineyard, and he drank of the wine, and was drunken, and he was uncovered within his tent. And Ham saw the nakedness of father, and told his 2 brethren without. Genesis 9:20-22. It is entirely fitting that Noah should become a husbandman, because archaeology tells us that agriculture began during this period, that Neolithic. But what are we to make of the strange story of his drunken nakedness? In order to make sense of it, we must turn to the tradition that identifies Noah with the legendary Greek figure Dionysus the Younger. We need to disentangle 2 different strands of stories concerning 2 figures with the same name. Dionysus is the name of 2 distinct individuals, a god and later a demigod. These 2 make very different contributions to human history in 2 different eras. The Dionysus who should be identified with Noah is very different from the earlier Dionysus Zagreus, the elder Dionysus, the story of whose dismemberment we told in chapter 6. After the flood, Dionysus the Younger, often depicted in a boat traveling from Atlantis via Europe to India, with the aim of teaching the whole world the arts of agriculture, the sowing of crops, the cultivation of the wine, and writing. This latter had of course been taught by Enoch, but was now in danger of being lost in the devastation brought by the flood. Dionysus and his followers carried the Therius, a pole wrapped with ivy-like snakes and topped with a pine cone, like a pineal gland. This shows that Dionysus also taught the secret evolution of the human form, the development of the spine topped by the pineal gland we have just been considering. The fauns and satyrs and the whole rout of Dionysus represent stragglers from Atlantis. They are the last remnant of a process of metamorphosis of forms, the curious story and genesis of Noah's. So I was using my vlogging camera for pretty much everything, and like now that I look at the webcam again, and probably when I hear the sound with the Blue Yeti again, I'm gonna be like, damn, because to my surprise, this quality, I mean, like, not quality, but like, I don't know, maybe, is better. What do you guys think? Is it better all of a sudden? Like, I mean, both are good, right? Like, let me know. That can be like the first thing you can comment if you are thinking about commenting. Alright, so my camera died when I was reading this excerpt, when I was reading this little side piece. Noah's Ark. Okay, and this is going to be about these little guys up here, okay? So this is kind of nice where the camera died. It's kind of like good because it was definitely going to die somewhere. So listen to this. Noah's Ark. Legend has it that the only animal that missed the ark was the unicorn, which therefore became extinct. This is an obvious depiction of the diminishing of the powers of the third eye. As the waters of the deluge closed over Atlantis, the era of imagination ended. The subconscious was formed. The unicorn missed the boat! Bro. I'm tired. Do you see what time it is? It's witching hour. Look at this picture of Dionysus the Younger was educated by the satyr Silenius. It's a baby and a naked man with a leaf on his junk. Sons uncovering his genitals while he was drunkenly sleeping also refers to the... Oh, the reason that this cut was because I read the piece that, is off to the side. So, we're back to this naked drunkenness. Sleeping also refers to the petering out of this process. We saw that the genitals were the last parts of human anatomy to evolve into their present form, and his sons were curious to find out about their origins. Were they the sons of a human or a demigod, a man or an angel? Stories about this individual in the Greek and Hebrew traditions, Dionysus the Younger and Noah, are both connected with the grape and intoxication. We have already met followers of Dionysus. The wild and savage Maenads tore Orpheus limb from limb with tooth and nail. In a state of ecstatic drunkenness, the Maenads were possessed by a god. Primitive peoples have always lived in tune with the vegetable part of their natures. One of the results of this is that they have understood how different plants have different effects on human biology, physiology, and consciousness. What we see in this Greek and Hebrew traditions of the beginnings of agriculture is a depiction of a new, more thoughtful form of consciousness. What greater outward symbol of the impact of orderly human on nature could there be than fields of wheat? The taste of the leaders of humanity would now be to forge the new thought-directed consciousness. My nose itches. I hope you grabbed a snack. If not, pause the video. Do what you gotta do. We only got a couple pages left. And they're interesting. Very juicy. What do they say? Saucy, saucy. Where were we? In the Zen Avesta, the sacred literature of Zoroastrianism, the Noah Dionysus figure is called Yima. He tells the people how to build a settlement, a var, a fenced-in place, taking in men, cattle, dogs, birds, and blazing fires. He instructs people that when they arrive at the place where they are to settle, they must drain off water, put up boundary posts, then make houses from posts, clay walls, matting, and fences. He urges his people to expand the earth by tilling it. There was to be neither suppression nor baseness, neither dullness nor violence, neither poverty nor defeat, no cripples, no long teeth, no giants, neither any of the characteristics of the evil spirit. Again, we see an anxiety about a reversion to anomalous forms of the previous epoch, such as giants. The Greek epic poet Nonnus described Dionysus' migration to India, and the same journey is also described in the Zen Avesta as the march of the Ram on India. But the fullest description comes in the great Indian epic, the Ramayana. What is clear from these accounts is that the great migrations eastwards were not moving into uninhabited territories. While the people of Atlantis had been all but eliminated, the immigrants traveled to new lands still occupied by aboriginal tribes. We see Dionysus' reaction to what he found in these new lands and his forbidding of cannibalism and human sacrifice. Native priests would sometimes keep enormous snakes or pterodactyls, rare survivors from antediluvian times, which were worshipped as gods and fed the flesh of... Are they talking about dinosaurs? Captives. The Ramayana described dragons. Game of Thrones. How Rama and his followers suddenly invaded these temples with torches, driving out both priests and monsters. Remember that scene in Game of Thrones where the two dragons were kept in the temple and the torches? Yeah. He would appear without warning among enemies, sometimes with bow drawn, sometimes defenseless, except that he was able to petrify them with his pale, lotus-blue gaze. Rama was disposed a nomad. His kingdom lay beneath the seas. He did not live the life of a king, but camped out in the wild with his beloved Sita. Then Sita was abducted by the evil magician Ravana. Oh. The Ramayana tells of the completion of Rama's journey with the conquest of India and the taking of Ceylon, the last refuge of Ravana. Rama formed a bridge over the sea between mainland India and Ceylon, with the help of an army of monkeys, which is to say hominoids, the descendants of human spirits who had rushed into incarnation too early and were doomed to die out. Finally, after a battle that lasted 13 days, Rama killed Ravana by showering fire down on him. We might see Rama as a Neolithic Alexander the Great. Following the conquest of India, he had the world at his feet. He also had a dream. He was walking in the forest on a moonlit night when a beautiful woman came towards him. Her skin was as white as snow, and she was wearing a magnificent crown. He didn't recognize her at first, but then she said, "I am Sita. Take this crown and rule the world with me." She knelt humbly and offered him a glittering crown, the kingship which had been denied him. But just then his guardian angel whispered in his ear, "If you place that crown on your head, you will see no more, and if you clasp that woman in your arms, she will experience such happiness that it will kill her instantly. But if you refuse to love her, she will live out the rest of her life, free and happy on earth, and your invisible spirit will rule over her." As Rama made up his mind, Sita disappeared among the trees. They would never see each other again, leading the remainder of their lives apart. Stories about Sita's later life suggest it was by no means obvious that she was as happy as the guardian angel had promised. In its ambiguity and uncertainty, there is something very modern about this story. We can also see in it a paradox that lies at the heart of the human condition. All love, if it is true love, involves a letting go. With his prowess, with the bow, his handsome face, blue eyes, and lion chest, Rama is in many ways like heroes of Greek myths, such as Hercules, but in the story of Rama there is, as I say, something new. Hercules was required to choose between virtue and happiness, and unsurprisingly chose the former. Rama's story, on the other hand, contains an element of moral surprise. The reader of the story will probably agree with Sita. as she argues with Rama that it is only right and fitting that he now accept the crown he has been cheated of since birth. But then Rama's surprising choices, deciding not to take the crown that is rightfully his, not to marry the woman he loves, these delay the moral imagination and quicken the moral intelligence. The story of Rama encourages us to see beyond the conventional, to imagine ourselves into the mind of others, and also ultimately to think for ourselves. Esoteric thinking has always sought to undermine and subvert conventional, habitual, mechanical modes of thought. Later we will see how storytellers, dramatists, and novelists steeped in esoteric thought, from Shakespeare and Cervantes to George Eliot and Tolstoy, would quicken the moral imagination, one of the distinguishing characteristics of the very greatest literature. If great art and literature give a sense of patterns, of laws operating beyond conventional thought, great esoteric art brings these laws nearer to the surface of consciousness. The story of Rama also brings us back to the notion that, according to the secret history, the cosmos has been formed in order to create the conditions in which people could experience free thought and free will. Rama could have enforced what is good and right on his people by ruling them with a rod of iron, but he let them decide for themselves. Rama is thus the archetype of the exiled or secret king or secret philosopher who influences the course of history, not from the throne, but the mingling incognito among the people. Rama tried to help humans to evolve freely. Rama is a demigod, but declines to be ruler of the world. No longer will gods or even demigods sit on thrones in bodies of flesh and bone. At journey's end, the immigrants founded Shambhala, a great spiritual fortress in the mountainous region of Tibet. The roof of the world, Tibet is the world's biggest, highest plateau, surrounded by high mountain ranges. Some traditions say the Tibetan population is directly descended from the people of Atlantis. Some say, too, that Shambhala can only be reached via an underground tunnel. Others that it exists in another dimension, into which a secret portal opens somewhere in the region. St. Augustine was the great Christian theologian after St. Paul, and like St. Paul was an initiate of a mystery school. He wrote about the place where Enoch and the saints lived, a terrestrial paradise so high up that the flood could not reach it. Emanuel Swedenborg, the 18th century Swedish theologian, diplomat and inventor, and also the leading esoteric Freemason of the age, wrote that the lost world must be sought among the sages of Tibet and Territory. Anne Catherine Emmerich, the 19th century German Catholic mystic, wrote similarly of a mount of prophets where live Enoch, Elijah, and others who did not die in the ordinary way, but ascended, and where unicorns which survived the flood may also be found. From the mountain fastness of Tibet flowed streams of living spirituality which joined together, gathered force, depth, and width, and became a mighty river like the Ganges feeding the whole of India. In this history of the world, written in the stars, the next era began as the sun began to rise in the constellation of Cancer, 7227 BC. When the first great Indian civilization, the earliest and most deeply spiritual of post-flood civilizations, was founded, the founders felt little for the nearly created material world, which they saw as Maya, an illusion threatening to obscure the higher realities of the spiritual worlds. They looked back with nostalgia to the time before this veil of matter had been drawn between humankind and the spiritual hierarchies. The icy baths and other forms of self-torture of the ascetics can be seen as part of this effort to stay awake to the spirit worlds. A conscious effort was made by them, while the veil was still relatively translucent, to remember the lineaments of the spirit world, and to impress them indelibly on human consciousness. The success of this enterprise has meant that India is still the world's greatest storehouse of spiritual knowledge, particularly as regardless occult physiology. As a high-level initiate recently said to me, if you visit India today, you cannot help feeling how the air still just crackles with astrality. Great Western teachers such as Pythagoras, Apollonius of Tyana, and Saint Germain have traveled to India in search of this astrality. The Gospels contain a few quotes from older Indian sources and more ideas than originated there. Sir John Woodruff, the Sanskrit scholar who first translated the Tantric texts in the 19th century, has written how even the venerable Sufi tradition lent on Hindu wisdom for teachings on the chakras, for example. In the 1960s, Indian religion was felt by many people in the West to offer a working spiritual knowledge, including practical spiritual disciplines and guides through the spirit worlds, which they could not find in church. A bookshop in the West is still likely to stock more books on mysticism derived from the Eastern than the Western tradition. Following Rama's refusal to take the crown, no great single personality dominates this period. If Rama was an all-action hero who fought monsters, went on long, dangerous adventures, and founded cities, his successors, sometimes called the Seven Wise Ones, or the Rishis, had a stillness and inactivity about them. They built no stone buildings, they lived in buildings of mud or simple shelters twisted into shape from roots and tendrils. Nothing of the Rishis had lasted except what they knew. This is a simple Kabbalistic saying. Everything you have seen, every flower, every bird, every rock will pass away and turn to dust, but that you have seen them will not pass away. This is a saying that would have seemed sympathetic to the Rishis, seated with legs folded so that the soles of their feet turned upwards. They had no desire to feel gravity, the downward reductive pull of the material world. They headed instead for the spiritual worlds. They were able to see spiritual beings at work on the earth, how they help seeds to germinate in springs, flowers to blossom in summer, trees to bear fruit in autumn, and how seeds are preserved through winter by these same spiritual beings. The Rishis experienced the ebb and flow of spiritual influence like a giant breath. Ancient Indian civilization was like the lowest realm of heaven. Earlier we talked about the way materialists misappropriate words and phrases such as the meaning of life, using them in a secondary, slightly dishonest sense. The same is true of spiritual, often used by people to puff themselves as good-hearted or moral in a warm, fuzzy, pseudo-mystical way. What it really means is the ability to see, hear, and communicate with the spirits like the Indian adepts. They were also able to communicate in occult ways. Other people were felt by them to be sympathetic, or not, by their breathing. By breathing in someone else's air, they could sense the person's inner life. Have you ever breathed through someone else's nose? You should try it. I mean, right now really isn't a great time to do that because, like, germs and, like, pandemic kind of stuff, you know? But maybe if you already have a significant other that you're, like, making out with and stuff, you can try that because you're already sharing germs, you know? So you can literally, like, if you connect mouths, you can breathe through their nose. It's really freaking cool. And maybe if you're watching this video, you, like, have already tried this because I have told you to try this. Let's continue. But I agree. You can breathe in a life force of somebody else. That is why when you have a dead body, you can bring back the life force, like call back the life force to it. But if you have another life force that is close by that also died, you can accidentally call that life force to the wrong body. It's a mess. Where were we? Adepts were able to pour their knowledge into the souls of others in an unceasing flow of pictures. Much later, this knowledge would be put into words and passed from generation to generation orally until it was finally written down as the Vedas. Their gaze could drive away serpents and calm lions and tigers. Nothing could deflect the adepts from their contemplation. They wandered freely, building only the flimsiest shelters, eating fruit and drinking the milk of their flocks. They would eat only vegetable matter, never any meat. To do so, they believed, was to absorb the animal's death agony. Same. They immersed themselves in vegetable consciousness in the physical process. Waking, sleeping, breathing, digesting, which we have seen, are the gifts of the vegetable kingdom to the human body. By learning to control the ens vegetalis, or etheric body, they could control too breathing, the rate of digestion, even the heart rate and the flow of blood, leading to the amazing feats for which Indian adepts are famous. The ability to stop the heart altogether just by thinking about it. For example, the adepts understood too how sinking deep into contemplation of the solar plexus chakra enabled them to perceive clairvoyantly, and they knew how to wrap others in a protective beam of love, emanating from the heart chakra. In addition to the 16 petals of the heart chakra, the adepts saw 101 subtle and luminous arteries issuing from the same area like spokes from a wheel. 3 of these larger arteries they saw rising to the head. One rises to the right eye and corresponds to the sun and the future. Another rises to the left eye and corresponds to the moon and the past. They understood how it was by a combination of these 2 organs that humans are unable to perceive the movements of material objects in relation to one another in space, and so also to have a sense of time passing. The middle of the 3 arteries ran up from the heart and through the crown of the head. By this routine, the way upwards may be illuminated from below, by means of a radiant heart, and it was by the root of this middle artery too, that the spirit world depart up through the crown and out of the body at death. To the ancient, all life was involved in a pulse, rhythm, or breath. They saw all human lives as breathed temporarily into the world of Maya, or illusion, then breathed out again, a process repeated through the ages. They saw great flocks or shoals of souls being breathed in and out of material life together. This ancient Indian civilization was in some ways an echo of the sun-filled, watery vegetable world of the period before the sun and earth separated. In some ways, it too was a lotus-eating period that would have to end if progress was to take place. We saw how great beings from the higher hierarchies could no longer still appear as semi-material specters or phantoms, but even this was happening less frequently. By the end of the ages, people might only see them with their physical eyes, once or twice in a lifetime. As the gods withdrew, people would have to find ways to follow them. In this way, yoga was born. At the height of their meditations, a rush of energy from the base of the spine would travel upwards through the middle artery via the heart to the head. Sometimes this energy was thought of as being like a snake, which rose through the spine up into the skull and bit at a point just behind the bridge of the nose. The bite released an ecstatic... Okay, so here's a picture of this. I don't know if that is supposed to be that heart chakra we were just talking about. But we have another, cut off here. The Neolithic Swastika, not my words at all, on a border on Kiley Moor in Yorkshire, England, is a symbol of the revolving 2-petaled lotus, and the same device in a Celtic sun brooch found in Sweden. The Rig Veda says, "Behold the beautiful splendor of Savitri, the sun god of the swastika, to inspire our visions." Alright. Right then. Not complaining at all. What almost done here. Do you like the accent? Maybe I should read a whole chapter in it one time. Not changing, but flattering, kinda, you know? We'll see. Lace like flocks of luminous currents, 700,000 light, 700,000 lightning flares, sounding like millions of bees, adepts would find themselves in another dimension that appeared at first to consist of a mighty ocean of giant weaving waves of light and energy, the preliminary mystical experience in all traditions. As they became more accustomed to the spiritual world, these apparently imperial forces would begin to revolve themselves into outer garments of the gods, and finally the faces of the gods themselves would emerge from the light, the same faces of the gods of stars and planets that have become familiar to us over the last few chapters. One of the shortest books in the world, but one of the most powerful, is called the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali. It was written down in its final form in about 400 BC, but originated in the teachings of the Rishis. Patanjali tells the reader to concentrate on the strength of the elephant, and by this meaning attain that strength. He says it is possible to know past lives by concentrating on the past. It would be wishful thinking to believe you or I might be able to perform these feats just like that. These are heights that now, as then, only the most advanced and highest initiates can attain. The rest of us will only be able to achieve them in future incarnations. The Rishis taught that the evolution of the whole cosmos is the goal of existence, and that the seeds of all this transformation lie in the human body. In 5067 BC, these gods were moving the cosmos towards the next stage of human evolution. As the sun entered the sign of Gemini, just as earlier the impulse for the evolution of humankind had moved eastwards from drowning Atlantis to India, now it began to move westwards, as it continues to do today. That, my friends, was the end of Chapter 9 of The Secret History of the World by Mark Booth. Next time we read this, we'll be reading Chapter 10, which is The Way of the Wizard. Super fun, if I may say so myself. Alright, thank you so much for being here with me for this Adult Bedtime Stories. If you have not already, please hit that subscribe button, smash the thumbs up button, comment what your favorite part of the chapter was, and maybe what picture you think was better, the webcam or the Sony. The webcam was the latter. And ring the notification bell so you always see when I upload. I mean, I could have a schedule if anyone thinks that would help, but no one has said anything about that thus far. And I feel like I'm missing something. Subscribe, bell, like, comment. Nope, that's everything. Thank you so much for being here. Goodbye, loves.